Hey guys, just a warning, everything in this video is going to spoil the current storyline stuff of Guild Wars 2 pretty majorly. If you haven't played the full patch just yet, I would recommend you do so. So, putting hype aside, let's get straight to fact, and I will bring you guys all into the loop, those of you who have not been following Guild Wars 2 too much recently, exactly what is going on with the community right now. Earlier today, and just today, people realized that ArenaNet had in fact registered a trademark called Guild Wars 2 Heart of Thorns. This also coupled with a report released earlier in the week from a very reputable site that had stated Guild Wars 2's predicted earnings for Q4 2015 were going to be massively higher than normal. Sort of set people into a spin and made it seem very, very likely an expansion would be finally released for the game, coming up on 2.5 years after its release, a time period a lot of people actually considered to have been far too long. With the hype train fully on the tracks a matter of 6-7 hours ago, people managed to dig up the very logo for Guild Wars 2, Heart of Thorns, which you should be able to see in the background right now, and things only got worse from there. It also just so happens that today is the day the finale for Guild Wars 2 Season 2 of the Living World is releasing. This sets us up with a very big cliffhanger for future events in the game, but then ArenaNet went above and beyond. It did something very unprecedented. After finishing Season 2 of the Living World, players are actually presented, if you were to do this right now, with another cutscene, like a bonus, almost trailer. The art style depicted in this cutscene is not anything we've been particularly familiar with in the Guild Wars franchise so far. It seems to be utilizing a lot of mocap stuff, a blending of in-game assets and concept art all together, to give us a very curious perspective of the things to come, as they say. This discusses a lot of very interesting story points, and before long you realize you're watching a full-blown trailer for Guild Wars 2 Heart of Thorns. The cinematic ends with a splash screen that you should now be able to see, quite obviously telling us that there is something different in the works here, something not the same as the Living World strategy they've been using so far since launch, something that we'll get more information about apparently just a little bit later on this month at PAX South. This was actually already revealed earlier in the week, but yes, ArenaNet are going to be at PAX South. This is the PAX in Texas. They will be taking the center stage, which 6 months ago they basically had no presence whatsoever at PAX Prime, and two of the biggest named devs basically at ArenaNet, Mike O'Brien and Colin Johansson, two developers, will be on the panel together to discuss apparently Heart of Thorns. They haven't been to a convention like this, spoken at a panel like this, on a stage like this, in any kind of remote capacity since before the launch of Guild Wars 2. All of this is pretty much confirming to people, hey, we're finally getting an expansion. I want to talk about this idea. I will straight away say, though, everything I have said so far in this video does not confirm an expansion. Yes, it seems very likely. Yes, it's something many of us want. Yes, it's something that will be marketable, something that will push Guild Wars 2 back into the mainstream spotlight, even if only for a little while. It's not, in my opinion, that the game needs to be back there, but we cannot complain about having more players, more activity, and more resources for the dev to make the game even better going forward. But there will be naysayers out there. There are people who have just been enjoying the Living World strategy, the fact that they could buy Guild Wars 2 just once for the price of the box, never pay a subscription fee, and then have almost supposedly bi-weekly updates for free forever that will continue the story. That will disappoint a few people, the idea that an expansion could be coming. And so you may hear a few crazy theories that I would love to indulge with you guys right now. Number one, Heart of Thorns could, in theory, think about this, simply be an opportunity for us, the consumer, to buy all of Season 2, or perhaps even Season 1 as well, of the Living World in one bulk package for some low price. And perhaps this can actually be sold in retail stores. Wouldn't that be very exciting? This is what Heart of Thorns is. No, I find that very unlikely. That would probably be the biggest disappointment the game could offer its players since launch, or any other variation of this theory. It would just be a terrible idea, and something I do not see coming. Some idea of, oh hey, this is how we're going to be selling the Living World in future. It's not going to be bi-weekly anymore. You're going to spend a $5 on something we're calling Heart of Thorns, and then we'll get a bunch more plots. I just don't really see that coming. So, I hear you wondering, now that we've sort of established exactly what's going on, what is the setup for the expansion? What is even going on with the story? Here's the timeline in full. Guild Wars 2 released, and then it started giving us continuing story updates that pushed the events of the plot beyond the initial personal story. The personal story, as many of you guys should remember, was fairly botched at launch, and put a lot of people off of the plot, but slowly, since release, ArenaNet have been making the story much more compelling for people, much more interesting, and much higher quality than the personal story ever attained, and we have come to know many new characters, and in particular, the existence of a new dragon, Morgemoth. This finale has finally laid to rest a few theories that were made by the community a long time ago. I have a video on my channel from back in 2012, sometime in August, before the launch of Guild Wars 2, titled The Pale Tree is a Dragon. In this video, I speculate all the different ways the Sylvari could be connected to a sixth hidden dragon that in fact would somehow be able to control them. Perhaps the Pale Tree was the dragon itself, perhaps the Pale Tree was simply a champion of that dragon. This patch today, and here comes the spoiler, has actually confirmed those theories, making a lot of people very happy. But this is a curious thing that ArenaNet have done. They have just revealed to the audience that essentially one of their 5 playable races could become sleeper minions of the great enemy, could be under the scrutiny and racism of many of the other playable races in the world, and this could somehow cause tensions, not just in the universe, but between players too. Is this the kind of thing ArenaNet can actually tie into? The greatest theme, I would say, of all of Guild Wars 2 at its initial release for these past 2 years has been the notion of 5 races of heroes banding together to take down a greater threat. And now they have finally revealed to us the idea that these 5 races cannot be totally unified any longer. It's like they're throwing their initial themes of cooperation and larger mechanical design philosophies, like always being happy to see other players, never having to compete and so forth, and it looks like they're turning that on its head. On the very day that they reveal the plot is indeed going this direction, that the Sylvari could ultimately become enemies, they give us a cinematic that dives into the idea a little bit more, and announce something new called Guild Wars 2 Heart of Thorns. Doesn't this again sound even more like it could be an expansion? That the big theme of the first expansion won't be about cooperation and everyone banding together, but maybe maintaining alliances, and maybe the game will start diving mechanically into areas it hasn't typically gone before, like embracing the competitive aspects of an MMO, like enabling simple things that Guild Wars 2 doesn't have, purely based on philosophy, such as the notion of being able to duel people in the open world. These things are big changes to the game, not just in terms of the story direction, but the mechanics too, and what is the best place to implement changes like that? Through an expansion. But before I get distracted and start talking about the patch a whole lot, let's talk more about the idea of what this expansion could include, why they're doing it, how long they've been working on it. Anyone who's been following my channel for a while will know that I've been a strong believer they're working on an expansion. The community, particularly over summer last year, was really down in the dumps. A lot of people were convinced there was nothing going on behind the scenes whatsoever, that these very few developers we were able to interact with and who were producing content for us, the Living World team, that they were it pretty much, that the rest of ArenaNet had been fired somehow, that they were just all in it for the marketing in the gem store now, and slowly they were going to run the game into the ground, that somehow ArenaNet had released Guild Wars 2 and there was no big project in the background despite the developers' comments that it did exist, and that there would be no future for the game, just slow, repetitive Living World updates that ultimately are not everyone's cup of tea. I think, honestly, that around that summer when this huge community backlash occurred when they had nothing to reveal to us at PAX Prime during the game's 2nd anniversary. When they saw this, they recognized that they really had to galvanize themselves, and they had to show us that something really was in the work. And I think that it was probably at that moment they decided they wanted to do something big now for us here in January, that they wanted to have a presence at PAX South. That's entirely my speculation, but given it's about a 6 to 7 month delay to get everything set up, I would say it's pretty feasible. As for the expansion itself, I believe this has been in the works for a very long time. And this is a good thing. First, I'll justify why I think this. It's because around launch, we did have comments from the developers shortly after the release of South Sun Isle, one of the first big updates to the game. This was after the initial Halloween update also, that they weren't entirely sure what they were doing in terms of expansion. But a couple of months later, we had heard contrasting comments with the initial drop of the Living World, that they had somehow come to a consensus. And it was at this point, I believe, the company had been split. The exact ratios of how many devs have been working on what and how they've slowly managed to hammer the Living World into something really cohesive and fun has probably changed a lot. But I do believe ever since that first Christmas, at the very latest, there has been a huge amount of work going on in the background from some of their top-level designers, people we haven't heard about for a long time, working on an expansion that ultimately looks like it's going to be to do with fighting the Elder Dragon Morgemoth. And maybe this explains a few things. Maybe when they started working on that, they knew it would take them about 2 years, and maybe this is why Season 1 of The Living World was so meandering, and so seemingly unrelated to the events of the Morgemoth arc, while Season 2, now that they have a much clearer idea of when this expansion is going to be released, has actually been a lot more focused and a lot more directed towards that plot. So here's what's very interesting that can easily slip by you if you don't pay attention. The trailer we are getting for Guild Wars 2 Heart of Thorns is showing us narrative things, story things that feed directly on from the Season 2 finale we're experiencing today. What does that mean, guys? That means that Heart of Thorns, should it be an expansion, is very likely to come rather soon. At least, perhaps, most likely before a Season 3 of the Living World drops. We would only expect, what, a 4-month break, tops, between now and the beginning of Season 3? Does that mean we could actually get an expansion anywhere within the 4-month to 6-month period? Personally, I would hedge somewhere around this summer. I would hedge probably that their first expansion drop will be coming around their 3rd anniversary. And this is a really good thing. You may wince a little at the idea, wow, they're just announcing expansion and you think it might drop in 4 months? Are you crazy, wooden potatoes? Well, no. Consider again that they have probably, very likely, been working on this for a long damn time. At the very least, in my opinion, over a year, and that could easily have them angled into a position where they can release quite a sizable, quite a quality expansion without too much waiting on our behalf. Now, I'm not going to be greedy and think that it's going to come super soon. I would expect a fair break before it drops, but it certainly looks like that's before Season 3, and that's going to be quite telling. Again, if this is an expansion and not just some horrible joke that they're playing on us. To come to this conclusion then, makes me want to talk about some other stuff too. We have this idea of ArenaNet being one company working on Guild Wars 2. Some of them are split off to make Living World stuff, which is what's been keeping the community going for 2 years, while the majority in the background have been working on the expansion. Now we know the expansion is coming, and there could be some kind of a break before we get back to the Living World, right? So what does the Living World team do now? Let's say it is 6 months before Heart of Thorns comes out. What can we expect from the Living World team? They can't keep producing stuff to do with Morgemoth, right? If that's eventually going to be conflicting with the expansion schedule. Well, I did write down a bit of a list. We know that there are a lot of other things ArenaNet do work on in addition to the Living World story updates. We have feature packs, which have, in my opinion, including Feature Pack 2, offered drastic improvements to the game, both for new players, mostly for new players, and just general quality of life improvements for the game, like the wardrobe, the transmutation system, the account wallet, and so forth. I believe we're probably going to see a feature pack drop in this intermittent period. This feature pack probably will have some kind of focus or slant towards the veterans, considering feature pack 2 was more towards the early players, and this contributed to a lot of those controversies earlier in the year. I think we're going to be seeing a feature pack that will prime the game in those last few areas, is cement through those last few gaps to make the core Guild Wars 2 experience really strong, so that when that expansion drops, when the audiences return, when new people even come to the game, they have this very sturdy environment to walk into. I think that's one big thing we can expect during the break. But look at some of the other things that they've announced to us before. Look at the fact that earlier in the year, ArenaNet did announce that all of Season 1, originally criticized for being temporary content, they confirmed it was on their plans to add this back to Guild Wars 2. Wouldn't this 6-month period while we're waiting for the expansion to drop and continue the story be the perfect time for them to drop Season 1 back into the game, to allow players who are maybe just coming into things, have missed all the story, are perhaps listening to me right now but are a little bit lost? Wouldn't that be perfect for these people to come back and then just be able to play the whole story? The personal story that we saw at the launch of the game, rolling through Season 1, which is now fully implemented again, and then through Season 2 also. I think the idea of Season 1 coming back in the next 6 months or so, therefore, is very, very high. There are other things too that the Living World teams can totally be working on without actually doing a story updates that will nonetheless keep the community happy. Again, this idea of the hardcore slant, again the idea of keeping the veterans enthused. They do have stuff like Fractals. Fractals is a fantastic idea but has been neglected for far too long. This would be a perfect time for them to add a whole bunch more Fractals, improve the way that Fractals work, maybe look at some of these previously great ideas but that will ultimately drop, such as Fractal leaderboards and more. Further beyond that, what is another much requested feature that they haven't had space or time or a convenient, interesting place to slot it back in, Super Adventure Box. Again, this is a perfect opportunity for ArenaNet to give us Super Adventure Box. Again, make those people happy again. Bring back some of these controversies from earlier in the year. People who thought Super Adventure Box would never return. This was never actually confirmed. Of course they wanted to do Super Adventure Box again, but they just needed a good time to do it. And now, guys, don't you think that's the perfect time? So, yeah, I really think that is what is in store for Guild Wars 2 over the next few months. It's entirely speculation, but I think we're going to be in some kind of a period where we do have 6 months or 4 to 8 months worth of updates still coming to the game, because the Living World team does still exist, and these are the kind of things that we'll be seeing come into Guild Wars 2. And no, it's not directly pressing on the story, but these are things that a lot of people want to see and ultimately should be there for the time a prospective expansion actually came down. Now, over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be doing a lot of discussion about the idea of the expansion, guys. There's so much to talk about. I think this is ArenaNet we're talking about. I think they have consistently kept trying to innovate in the MMO space, even since Guild Wars 2 came out. If the Living World, even if it was a bit of a failed experiment for a while, is not a good example of that, then I don't know what is. And I think if they're going to do some kind of boxed expansion, we shouldn't expect it to be totally traditional. We shouldn't expect it to be, oh, hey, you still have to buy Guild Wars 2 and then buy another 50 quid on top of that. I think ArenaNet are very adverse and tense and scared about segregating their community by having an in-game world where only players with certain boxed things can experience certain things and everyone's split up. I think they are 100% against that, and for that reason I think whatever their pricing model is, however they ultimately decide to release this expansion, will surprise us. And I think we're going to get a lot of information about that, probably confirmation that the expansion is going to be focusing on the veterans and the established players, and mainly this pricing model, how they'll deal with that. That's what I think we're going to be seeing at PAX South with Mike and Colin in just a few months. I think that's where a lot of the discussion will go. My prediction, the easiest thing they could do, which would perhaps be a little too generous, who knows, but would just be to have a box expansion. Anyone who buys it gets the base Guild Wars 2 game for free. But who knows, they could come out with something much more ludicrous, much more ridiculous, and we may see that a lot of the hype about this supposed expansion, should it all come true, is not just going to be about the kind of things they could add in it, but also the way that they release it and deal with it, and so that should be fairly interesting to see. That's about it, guys. The footage you've been seeing in the background is this trailer. You can join me tomorrow for a frame-by-frame look through these two cutscenes, basically, we had released. The trailer and story-wise what it could mean, what we could be seeing in this X-Pack, and there's some really interesting things hidden in there, say straight away, such as spears, perhaps are these new weapons that are becoming. Even some people are saying they may have seen a Massart or a Seer. This should be pretty cool. So I'll see you guys for that tomorrow. Let me know what you think. Is it crazy that we're all suddenly assuming it's an expansion? I have to say, I'm like 95% sure it's an expansion. I guess we'll just have to wait a couple of days until PAX South. Thanks, guys. I'd love to hear what you think. Have I missed the mark anywhere? Well, we'll see. Have a great evening, guys. I'll catch you next time.